Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, marketing exec by day, AI experimenter by day, night, and basically every other waking moment in between at this point.
And I'm Kyle, your resident tech guru. I've spent the last decade building data systems, products, and AI tools that solve real-world problems. My goal is to cut through the noise and show you how this tech actually works for your business. Each week, we'll break down AI concepts, tools, or trends that actually matter for your business. We'll explain what it is, why you should care, and how to use it without needing a computer science degree.
So whether you're a small business owner, an entrepreneur, or you're just tech curious, grab your coffee, close that tab where you've been staring at ChatGPT for the past 3 weeks wondering what to do with it, and let's dive in. Just think of us as your guides through the wild, wonderful, and sometimes completely overwhelming world of AI.
This is Early Adopter.
Yeah. Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess.
And I'm Kyle. And today we have a fantastic guest joining us. We have Sean from Breakthrough Growth Partners. We're very excited to have him on the podcast with us today. We'll be exploring AI transformation and AI policy fundamentals and why they matter so much for your business. And these aren't just about short-term productivity improvements. They are business multipliers that can transform your entire operation.
And before we get into everything, I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping and just remind everyone that we are on social media now. You can follow us on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube, and we are at early_adopter. And remember, there's no E in the adopter on all those platforms. So come hang out with us on socials.
Absolutely. And I want to kind of talk a little bit about, if you've been following us for the last few weeks, you've seen our typical structure where we get into an educational segment and then we'll do some news. Well, the exciting bit about having Sean with us today is that we get to change our structure a little bit. So we're going to do things a little bit differently. It's going to be a little bit less of just Jess and I talking at you. And we're actually going to have someone who knows what they're talking about, telling you all about what they're doing, in their day-to-day, the businesses that they're working with, and the really exciting things that they do within these businesses and how that you can then translate that to your own business, workflow, productivity gains, etc. As we were talking to Sean about this segment, we got really excited. And we realized also that there's just way more that we can do in one episode. So the great news is we brought Sean on, but this isn't going to be the only time you see Sean. This is part one of a two-part series. And so without further ado, we want to welcome Sean to the podcast, and we'll start getting right into it.
I'm really excited to be here. I love what you're doing with Early Adopter. So let me introduce myself and tell everyone why I love Early Adopter. So I am Sean Bhardwaj. I'm the managing partner at Breakthrough Growth Partners. We help organizations and communities embrace innovation and grow into the future, especially when it comes to AI and emerging technology. So over the last few years, as you can imagine, a lot of my work has been focused on helping leaders make sense of the AI landscape and what it means for their team, what it means for their business, how to use it responsibly, and how to turn all of that hype into something that's actually practical and useful. I've been deep in this world for a while, pre-ChatGPT, so I guess I'm a little bit of an AI hipster. But what I find interesting is that even now, it's been 2.5, almost 3 years since ChatGPT went public. There's still plenty of smart, capable people trying to get their bearings, and I hear it all the time. We know AI matters, it's important, but we just don't know where to start and what to do with it. What I think is the good news for everyone is we're all still figuring it out. So I may know a tiny bit more than most, just having spent more time with it, but we're all learning together. So you're not too late, you're right on time, but the important thing is to get started with some structure. And that's why I love what you're doing with Early Adopter, to be able to give people that knowledge and information to provide some of that foundation so they can grow. I'm really glad to be here.
We are very excited to have you. And I think that's exactly our mindset. Like, everyone is kind of starting off on a level playing field here because it's so early doors with a lot of this stuff. So no one should feel like they're left behind right now because everyone's really almost at the same place.
It's great to hear you say that. And I think a lot of our audience should be, happy to hear you say that. The important thing, like you said, is to just start somewhere. And that's a lot about what we talk about. And I think the great news about this segment and, next week's when we follow up with it is going to be about, how you can get started. What are some of the things to look for? So before we start kind of diving deep, let's take a bit of a step back. I want to paint a picture of what's happening, I think, in businesses right now. And I guarantee that for a lot of you out there, this is also happening within your business, whether you know it or not. So picture this. It's Tuesday morning, and Sarah from your marketing team is struggling with a product description. It's due in an hour. She's under a tight deadline. She opens ChatGPT on her personal account, which is probably the free version, and pastes in your entire product roadmap, including launch dates, pricing strategy, and competitive analysis. And why does she do this? Just like we've talked about, she needs to add context, and it's going to help her write better copy. And she's got a deadline, so she's really, struggling to get that thing done. But she's just put a lot of very sensitive information in there, right? Meanwhile, your sales director is feeding customer email conversations into Google Gemini. Your HR manager is using an AI tool to screen resumes that probably includes personal information. And let's not even get started on what your finance team is probably doing to help with their analysis, right? But what's kind of telling about this is a recent Salesforce study found that 55% of global employees admit to using unapproved AI tools at work. And where I think this gets really interesting is 40% of those workers admit to using banned AI tools, even when their company has explicitly prohibited them. So it's kind of like telling your team not to use their phones at work and then being surprised when they step outside to take calls. To dive a little bit further into this as well, the National Cybersecurity Alliance discovered that 38% of employees are sharing sensitive work information with AI tools without their employer's permission. So that's customer data, financial information, strategic plans, the stuff that could seriously damage your business reputation if that were to get, out and into the public hands.
This is really making me think about every small business owner that I know who's probably dealing with this right now and actually has no idea. And, they're worried about whether or not to invest in a CRM system when their team is actually probably feeding customer data into a random AI tool, which just screams GDPR violation to me. But what do I know?
And perhaps the most telling statistic, I think, comes from Microsoft and LinkedIn's research, which is 75% of workers are using AI in the workplace, but over half of them don't want to admit they're using it for the most important tasks. So where does that secrecy come from? I think they're worried it makes them look replaceable. And we're all very worried, and that's come up multiple times again. We talked about it last week, this idea that you're going to get replaced by AI. So ultimately, what you have is this perfect storm. Employees are using AI because it genuinely helps them do better work. I mean, we talk about that all the time. But unfortunately, they're doing it in secret with unsecured tools, often violating policies that they may not even know that exist. In fact, Slack's Workforce Lab found that nearly 2 in 5 workers report their company has no AI usage guidelines at all.
So we've got people hiding their AI use because they're scared of being replaced, and they're also, in the meantime, potentially exposing customer data or company data because no one told them how to safely use the AI.
Mm-hmm.
And this really feels like a management.
So your team is already getting a competitive advantage from AI. They're being more productive, creating better content, making faster decisions, but they're doing it in a way that could expose your most sensitive data, violate compliance requirements, and create a massive liability. So that's why we're here to talk about AI policy today. It isn't some nice to have corporate governance exercise. It's an urgent business imperative because right now you're getting all the risk of AI adoption with none of the control.
Yeah, so basically your choices as a business owner isn't whether or not your team is using AI, because as we've discovered, quite a lot of them are already, but the problem is whether you're going to guide that usage or you're just going to kind of hope for the best. And we feel that you should probably guide that.
So no pressure today, Sean, but you're going to help us kind of dig through and understand how can a business owner navigate this nightmare that we know people are using the tools. We know how important it is, but at the same time, there are a lot of risks, and we need to make sure that there's proper usage, guidelines, policies, all of that.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. And what I like to do is I'm going to start and zoom us out even further, right? Because there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of hype, and we can just take a deep breath and say, this movie with AI and how it's playing out, this technological shift, We've kind of actually seen it before, maybe not in our lifetimes, but it's not something that's unknown. So if we look at the story of human history and look at it as part of a longer story, all of the foundational shifts in how we work and communicate, I'm talking, let's go back to like the printing press, the steam engine, electricity, computers, and the internet. You see a pattern. And that pattern is we find ways to increase productivity, right? Do things in ways that we were doing manually and automate them. And that's where it starts. But what actually happens after that is more interesting. And it ends up transforming entire industries, entire workflows, and even cultures. I think AI is next in that line, and we all intuitively sense that. So that's where you get some of the hype and the buy-in, where people are really worried about this is going to replace me and it's going to cause all these negative externalities, or it's going to do all these positive things. And we're not quite there yet. We're still in the early stages, right? Most businesses who are even adopting, especially generative AI, if we focus on that, are just using it maybe to write emails faster or summarize documents and just some of the more basic use cases, which is totally fine, but we're just scratching the surface. And so if we're worried about and we're thinking about where the opportunities and where the risks for AI, where it could replace jobs and wipe out whole professions en masse, it's not here yet. So we can take a beat and say, what can we do to orient ourselves in a way that's going to lead us to success in the future? And thinking about it rather than something that's going to be an extinction level event, instead, it's really a shift in how the value is created, who's creating that value, and in what ways they're doing it. So I find, two analogies here useful to think about. The first is the Industrial Revolution. So before the shift, and there's, depending on how you look at it, there's multiple industrial revolutions. But if we just kind of take it as a piece to a whole of starting with, steam engine work and then moving into factories as a means of production, when it first started, work was all done by individual craftspeople, right? So if they were making something, they would make it start to finish, and that's how it was done. But then when automation and energy became available, we didn't just speed up how that was done and one person was making the same chair start to finish. We changed the workflow. And that's what made factories work. So it's a combination of new systems, new capabilities, new roles, and most importantly, new skills. So AI is doing something very similarly, but instead of doing it with physical work, it's doing it with knowledge work. So we're moving from everyone doing every part of the mental knowledge work manually, whether that's writing or researching or analyzing, to a model where AI takes over pieces of the process. And what that means is our workflows and skill sets have to evolve too.
That's such an interesting point, and I think, and I see that a lot in what we're seeing around, throughout the industry. We look at, people putting AI on top of the tools and the systems that we've been using for a long time and trying to improve those productivities. But I think there's a lot of conversation happening, and it's starting to gain some steam to kind of address what you're talking about, where we need to rethink the whole workflow, right? I look back at like a CRM system, I think is a good example, right? We're using AI to interrogate or question a CRM system. But with AI, the way that you can use it for content generation and personalization of your outreach and whatnot, you could design a completely different system and totally turn a CRM on its head. But we're not quite there at that point, right? It's going to take us time to get there. At the moment right now, we're just slapping AI on top of the stuff we've already been using for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's generally what happens, right? When we have this sort of general purpose foundational technology, we're still learning how it goes. So that's where it's like, okay, let's all take a beat. It's going to be okay. We're going to figure it out together. And if you're engaged, if you're listening to this podcast, and if you're thinking critically about it, you're exactly in the right place where you need to be to catch that wave. But, now having maybe gotten everyone calm and be like, okay, I don't need to worry about this. Let me turn up the urgency dial a little bit with another analogy that brings it to the individual level. So, all of us have been working in the age of computers, certainly for the last, some more decades than others, but a few decades. In the 80s and the 90s, right, when computers were first coming out and coming off of typewriters, typing was like a resume-worthy skill, right? Like you could say, how many words per minute could you do? Could you do 60 words per minute? That was the baseline. And having that gave you a real advantage. But today, typing is just expected, right? It's like legibility. It's like being able to write. Like what matters isn't how fast you're typing. It's what are you typing? What are you creating? Who are you reaching? What's the message? And AI is on that same trajectory, right? It's a skill that we have access to. But right now, using ChatGPT or any one of the AI tools feels like an edge, but very soon it's just going to be assumed. So the real skill is going to be, how do you think about using it? How do you prompt it? How do you guide it to create something valuable? And then can you layer on your own thinking, your own context, your own judgment to build on that? So maybe the big reason that we're all feeling this apprehension is that this shift is happening more rapidly than in the past, right? The printing press took centuries to kind of really roll out and democratize the access to the books. Electricity and steam engine took multiple decades. Even computers took, the better part of half a century. And then the internet has taken about 20 or so years. But AI, we're not even 2.5 years into Gen AI going public, and it's already reshaping everything. So we feel like it's happening very quickly, and it is. And that's the big difference. The reason is that the infrastructure is already here, right? Like, we've spent the last several decades building out the cloud platforms, the SaaS tools, API, mobile, all of the plumbing we need is in place. And so that's where we're seeing and sensing that more, I'm going to call it immediate. It's not, literally tomorrow, but like more near-term immediate disruption. And that's what puts pressure on leaders, especially in smaller organizations, to adapt quickly while still figuring out how to run their business day to day.
Yeah, I think I really like your example, that second example of how it affects people. And I think our audience is probably feeling this in certain ways, whether you're a business owner or a professional. You're probably feeling it, if you think about like the job candidate process, right? There used to be a time where, you didn't talk about AI. It was just something you were doing. Now, I think a lot of the roles and job descriptions are, how do you use AI? And I think we're going to get into a way where that's even going to start to percolate into the interview questions. If it was me, I would start asking people, well, how do you use AI for your role? How do you think about prompting? What are the ways that you can benefit most? Because I'm going to start wanting to hire people who are AI native or AI first, whether it's a marketing role, a finance role. So I think that's something that we're starting to see. And like you said, the adoption is happening very quickly. That shift in kind of the way that we hire is happening far faster than some of these other examples.
I think you nailed it, Kyle. And what I would add to that is, the biggest opportunity with AI isn't replacing people. It's helping them do more meaningful work if we're smart about how we apply it. And that's what often gets missed in the big narrative about hype, right? Because it's really this focus on efficiency. We're like, oh, we can use AI and save a certain amount of time, or we can use AI, and then some companies look at it as a way to downsize people and save a lot of money. But that's not really where the biggest bang for the buck is. And let's just do the thought exercise, right? If most organizations can say, all right, we're answering emails, and now we use a generative AI platform, we get an hour back answering emails. What do they do with that time? They usually just spend it answering more emails, right? It's like Groundhog Day. It's like, oh, now I can do even more emails, right? And then what does that happen? Then you send more emails. And so you just kind of fill the time that you saved doing the same thing that you were doing before. So the real leverage is about thinking about how you use the resources that AI is freeing up to actually make a significant change, to improve your product. If you're a manager, to have more time to coach your team, to deepen your customer experience, or test something completely new. And that's where the transformation starts to happen, not with the tool, but how you reinvest what it gives you. And this is where I think small businesses and scrappy teams have the biggest opportunity, because unlike a large organization, I've worked with quite a few, they don't have to unwind layers and layers of the status quo to try something new. They can move faster and with less friction. But the key here is you got to move with intention, not just speed.
Right. Yeah, I mean, look at a great example of this is, a small business can want to implement an AI workflow in a Tuesday meeting and have it running by Thursday. Whereas, those enterprise competitors, they're forming a committee to talk about forming a committee to fill out a form, to try and then get access to a Microsoft Copilot tool or some other tool that they already have. So definitely you can move a lot quicker as a small business. And I really love the example you talk about, the real leverage is, freeing up your resource, and that improving your product is a great example. Rather than, I think we do get stuck in this cycle of just trying to shove more of the same into that time, right? Oh, we can now answer twice as many emails, or I can book twice as many meetings. But I think, we start talking about this kind of massive shift. I think about like Netflix, right? Netflix, it wasn't about just watching TV easier in a more convenient way, but it totally changed how we consume entertainment. So if I go back to your example about the real leverage to improve your product, it's not about just making more features, right? It's actually about how do I prototype completely new segments, bring that to market faster so that I can test demand. I mean, that's a total, mindset shift, something that you can do. You're not just making more product features, you're actually changing the way that your supply and demand of product, which I think is a really interesting point. One other thing I want to ask Sean, when you work with small businesses, what's the typical timeline that they work with and like, we should try AI to actually seeing that transformation that you're talking about? Is it months, years? Like, what does that timeline look like?
Yeah, it varies is the short answer, but we'll harp on our enterprise friends here for a moment. And I'll give you a funny analogy. So I have a toddler running around. We have events in our area. They're called Touch a Truck. And so they get a bunch of trucks, like fire trucks and garbage trucks and dump trucks and everything. They all park them together. And then it's a place where kids can go and they can touch a truck and see the truck, which is totally fascinating, right? But we all know AI is here and everyone's trying to figure out what to do with it. And so in large enterprises, especially, you have this like touch an AI thing, right? Like every executive from every department wants to make sure they're aligned with the new hot topic. So they're going to want to insert their something, put a fingerprint on it, put a stamp on it to be like, yes, we were engaged. And that's one of the reasons that things slow down quite a bit. But why is that? Is I think there is that intuitive understanding of like, there is something valuable here, but if you just touch it at the surface level, it's not enough, right? And so when we talk about what is the timeline for transformation, surface level, sure, we can, you can take some great prompts and great frameworks that we've learned on this podcast and put them into practice and probably gain some leverage within a week, I would say, of consistent use. But if you're really talking about adopting it across a team or a company, short-term efficiency gains are going to be in the 6-12 month timeframe, generally speaking. Real transformation, because it's not just adopting technology and not just practicing the basics, but really changing your workflows, training yourself to think about your working process, right? Like we've machined organizations quite a bit where not just frontline staff, but even managers have a set of routines and habits and behaviors that they go through. And they're not thinking about doing it differently. They're just thinking about doing it and executing it because they're so overloaded. So thinking critically about it and engaging with AI in a different way is a very new skill. And it's a higher order leadership and management skill. We'll probably talk about that in a bit. But so that type of change is more human and technology centric. That's the stuff I love, but that takes a little bit of time because you're really changing behaviors, you're changing culture, and how you use things, how you think about things. So that's like the 1-3 year, I would call that the mid time frame, where you can see those quality improvements. And then we get into the really fun stuff, right? Which I would say is in the, call it 2 to 5, 3 to 5 year range, where you think long term, and you can really come up with some transformative ideas and see, where the puck is going and skate to where the puck is going, and come up with some new disruptive things for your business and for your industry. So that's kind of the time frame. And when we think about policy, we think about strategy, we want to look at it across those different areas to build to that real value that we can get to.
I was going to say, in my experience, one of the biggest issues that I've had when I've done business process stuff is getting people comfortable with something new, because even if it's nothing to do with AI, even if it's just using a new tool or something, people get very set in their ways of doing things because they've been doing it that way for ages. It works. It might not be the most efficient. They might bitch about it every day, but it does the job. And they're so afraid of touching that and breaking it that they don't want to do something new, even if the new thing is going to really massively benefit them. They're too scared because the thing that they've been doing for years works. It might suck, but it works. And so that's from my experience with these sorts of things. It's so much of it is just that mindset shift, and I think that is the thing that that can take the longest. Sometimes you'll get early adopters like us, and then you'll get these people that just dig their heels in because they don't want to change their system.
Yeah, and Sean, I really like that kind of AI button for business owners. We hear that a lot, right? That we feel like there's a lot of pressure. And I think a lot of people listening are feeling that pressure, like they need to figure out AI immediately or they'll be left behind. So what would you tell them about timing, especially within that context of, 6 to 12 months for productivity gains, 3 to 5 years for your strategy. That's probably longer thinking than most people are feeling, because I think we sometimes feel like with all this AI stuff going on, like, man, I got to get on it today, or I got to get on it yesterday, right? And I'm already behind. So maybe talk to our listeners a little bit. Are they late, or do they still have some runway?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is no, right? No one is late. There is still plenty of runway and opportunity. There's a quote, it's sometimes attributed to Abraham Lincoln, but it's one of those historical things no one really knows. But the quote goes, if I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I would spend the first 4 sharpening the axe, right? And so I think there's a lot of this like ready, fire, aim behavior that happens because of that sense of urgency. So we need to use AI. So we get AI and we drop it into everything, and then it doesn't quite work, and we're not really sure what we're doing. And then did we succeed? Did we fail? Where are we now? And we've lost the plot. And then we try to aim it, right? So I think that if you have someone on their listening to this podcast and saying, oh, I'm being left behind. No, if you're thinking about it and you are strategic with how you approach it and you do it in a thoughtful way, you have plenty of time for the skill development and the capability building. That happens intuitively when these other pieces come together first. So it's not just about starting. It's about starting in the right way with clear intention, with clear strategy, and with some structure. And then there's not just plenty of time, but you're still, ahead of the curve.
Love that so much. I think, I'll go to kind of a product analogy on this one. And to your point, you still have to go through all of the preparation that you would do in the past. Understanding the voice of the customer, understanding the user experience that you want. Sure, AI can help you, do product, proof of concepts and prototyping. It can really help with the personalization aspect. It allows you to do a lot more within that product. But the hard truths of product building is still going to be consistent. You still need to talk to the customer. You still need to do that 4 hours of, sharpening the knife preparation before you do that last little bit. So I think that's super important for everyone to remember. But if this is where we are in the curve, kind of early adoption, a lot of hype, but some real capability, and we try to expose a lot of that here. I think the next question is, how should you think about AI inside your business?
Yeah, and I love the intern analogy. One of the simplest ways that I explain Gen AI to leaders is that think of it like your MBA intern. And I use the MBA moniker as just an indicator of like the level of intelligence, right? At a certain point, it'll be your PhD intern. At a certain point, it'll be the beautiful mind intern, right? Like it's just gonna have more. But for today, I think that an MBA intern is a good analogy. It's smart, right? It's fast. It's been trained on a lot of conventional knowledge. It wants to please you. But it has no context for your specific situation, no organizational knowledge or experience, and it definitely doesn't have business judgment. So if you don't get a clear direction, it's going to try to impress you like a real intern, sometimes with overconfidence and sometimes with just things that look great on the surface, but don't really stand up to scrutiny if you look at it. I'll explain it firsthand from personal experience. So I early in my career was working for Axon, and I started off in their management rotation program, and they were actually developing the body camera R&D group at the time and exploring that. So this is way back in the day. And so I did my first few months there and then moved to my next rotation, which was in the public relations team. So one of my first days then in the office, and so the R&D group was here in California and the PR team and headquarters was in Arizona. So, I just moved to Arizona. It's day 2. I got an email with an external inquiry asking, who owned the video footage from the body cameras. It was a production company, and they were like, oh, it'd be really good to use this stuff if it happens to come up with like a show like Cops, but with that first person view footage. So I checked with the R&D leader because I thought I knew the answer to this, and the head of PR, and said, our policy, as I understood it, is we weren't going to use the footage and that it belonged to whoever the client was. So they could liaise with their local PD, and that's how they could get it. And I thought everything was fine. I was like, I did a good job. I connected a dot that no one knew, all those things. Very, very happy with that experience. So the next day I walk into, my queue, and there's a few hundred people in the company at the time. The president and general counsel of the company walked straight up to my desk. My desk wasn't on yet. It was like in the middle of this maze of cubes, right? Like I'm one of the newer.
You never want the general counsel to be walking towards you. That's always a bad sign, right?
No. And he asked for me by name. He doesn't say like, who are you? He just goes, "Hey, Sean, I heard you sent an email yesterday about, a production thing." I was like, "Yeah, I double checked with like these two leaders and all those things." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm going to need you to forward me that email and like every related file you have on it." Which
Never
was, so much trepidation. So then like an hour later, I get copied on an email, and he basically sends a blistering note saying, "You received some erroneous information from one of our, rogue interns. We're going to defend all of our video rights, and like you don't have access to these things." So what happened? Like, right? Like I covered my bases. I think I did my due diligence. But what I didn't know is that there was actually a deal they were making with a production company on the back end. It wasn't public knowledge. It was a very early stage. And so without that context, I lacked the judgment. I came up with the right answer, right, according to what I knew, but I did not have enough knowledge and context to actually make the right decision. And so that's how Gen AI works. It's not bad at its job. It just doesn't know what good looks like unless you help define it. So luckily I didn't get fired from that. And I got a rogue intern t-shirt out of it, which was like inside joke topical at the time.
I love that rogue intern t-shirt. We're gonna get you another one of those, or maybe we're gonna make that a little merch for our audience. We'll co-brand that if you're okay with it, Sean.
Yes, I love it. It was great. I need it. It got lost over the years, so I'd be happy for another one.
I think that story is so good though, because it really is an example of blaming the intern, and in this case, it was absolutely true. But I think I really like that way of framing it, because one of my biggest pet peeves is when someone is set up to fail. So when you don't have the information that you need to succeed, and so then you end up not doing something well, or you mess it up. But actually, that was nothing to do with you, because you weren't given the information that would allow you to succeed. And it feels like that was exactly the situation that you were in. How are you supposed to know that they were working on, their own version of cops? But I never equated it to this, but you're totally right. That's exactly what it's like when AI doesn't have the context. It was immediately set up to fail because it doesn't have the right information that it needs to succeed.
Yeah, it's a terrifying, and I'm sorry you went through that, Sean, but it's a pretty, in hindsight now, it feels a hilarious example, right? But AI doesn't have the bigger context, right? It can give you a technically correct answer, but it doesn't understand what's going on in the background. It doesn't understand the political sensitivities. So, I harp on context constantly, but this is another great example of you need to provide it with the proper context.
Yeah, and that's why part of the reason this is so disorienting is generative AI, while built on software, works very differently from what we expect. And so traditional software is very deterministic, right? Like we put in X and we get Y, and we can predict it, and we can measure it, and we can scale it, and we know what that is. But generative AI is probabilistic, right? You put in a prompt and it gives you a range of likely outputs, some which are great and some which are off. And by the way, everyone's generative AI will give them a different response. So recently my wife was using ChatGPT and she gave it a prompt, and I was like, "Oh, you should put that prompt into my phone. I want to see what it would say for me." And she looked at it and she's like, "Wow, your AI responds completely different to you than mine does." And so she's like, "I asked it to do this thing and it just pulled it. It pulled some information, but yours was like, can you tell me like the sensitive thing?" Like it asks you questions and it's very like on the rails because of the way that I engage with it. And so what does that mean, right?
I think that goes into this memory, right? I was talking to someone recently about how, I curate the memory that ChatGPT knows about me, because I recognize that over time, if I put something in there that I'm testing out and it remembers that, that's going to affect going forward. So, for our listeners as well, think about that memory piece that's in ChatGPT. You might want to go through there and actually see what ChatGPT remembers about you, or you can even prompt ChatGPT and go, "Hey, what do you know about me?" And you might be a little surprised or horrified by the results.
Yes, absolutely. It's great. And what a very interesting product lock-in technique, right? As we think about that over time, where you use a model and you give it all this information, and now it's very tailored to you. So if you want to switch from A to B, some very interesting implications from the product side of it. But staying on topic at hand, that's the big thing, right? Like there is no guarantee that what you're getting out of AI is correct. There is no guarantee that what you're getting out of your MBA intern is correct. Or if we're really thinking about it strategically, there's no guarantee you're getting it right with any staff or any vendor or any client that you work with. It's up to you to decide whether that result that you're getting is accurate, useful, and aligned. And so that's where, we don't want to think of AI as a person, but thinking about using AI as a collaborator and someone who needs to be managed as opposed to just a tool that's a software tool to be used is important. We need to train it. We need to review and revise what we get out of it. We need to know how to ask better questions and how to filter the responses. And we need to know how to manage the risk of when it does not perform in the way that we would ideally prefer.
That's really interesting. And I kind of want to stop here and pause and really think about that concept, because I think what you've just identified is kind of that, again, that mindset shift, which is this is, we think of Gen AI, we think of ChatGPT, Claude, all of that as another tool. And I think what you're basically telling us is don't think of it as a tool, think of it as a team member. And we love the intern analogy. I know we've used that, but I don't know if we really truly made that point, which is it's not a tool, it is a team member. Treat it like an intern that you have to train and you have to grow and evolve over time. And like you said, I love this rogue intern. This tool that you use that you need to treat like a team member can go rogue, not out of necessarily any malicious intent, but just because that's what it's trained on. And if you're not providing that oversight and reviewing and revising its parameters, it's going to kind of go off and you've got to bring it back.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if we come back to then, the bigger conversation, right? Besides funny stories, like how do we think about it then in our business and take it to the next level? Mm-hmm. So now we know how to think about generative AI, and you're spot on, Kyle, of like it is more of an additional team member than just a software tool. But then what do you do with that team member, right? And if we tie it back to that conversation we had before, there is, I think, working in innovation for a long period of time, a over focus on quantifiable efficiency. So when I say efficiency, I mean we want more of the same, we want it faster, we want it cheaper, right? And like those three things or some combination of those three things is efficiency. And so a lot of teams want to jump right into using AI to save time. But it's that surface level engagement interaction. And then very quickly, you either maximize the gains you can get with that level of effort, or you just say, well, this doesn't work for me. And AI is just all hype. Neither of which is quite accurate. So another analogy that I like for this, and I'll use one, is tennis. I love tennis, and Wimbledon just wrapped up. So for those who don't know, or even for those who do, when you're first learning tennis, especially as an adult or someone who's older, the coach's goal is not to make you, someone who's going to play at Wimbledon. Their goal is to help you keep the ball in play. So they're trying to teach you a basic forehand, right? You hold the racket in this way, you minimize your movement, you kind of hit the ball low to high, you get it over the net and into the court. And their only goal is, how can I get you to do this as quickly as possible to achieve a certain level of proficiency? But if you look at how young kids are trained, the ones who have a chance at going pro, it's completely the opposite. Like one of the top coaches says, you need to feel like you're throwing the racket into the ball. So there's videos of him and he's like, here's how I'm training this like 10-year-old. And he's like, I don't care if any of these balls go in. I want you to swing at this thing like you're throwing your racket. Like he literally has it at court and he's like, throw your racket, like literally drop it and throw it in the ball. It makes no sense because it takes a long time. But because they are practicing that way over and over again, they're then able to learn how to hit and control the tennis ball at super high speeds. And that produces those pro level results in the end. So they're willing to get it wrong, and they're willing to go a little bit slower in the development in the short term to build towards that long-term precision power, right? And like that's where dabbling leads to plateaus, but mastery creates transformation. And so I like to talk about this concept a lot where proficiency has to come before efficiency if you really want those big transformative results. If you just focus on efficiency at the surface level, you can get it quickly and it's minimal effort, but it's not going to translate to lasting competitive advantage because you're just doing what everyone else can do in a short period of time. So that didn't do anything different. And if you want that value at scale, you have to approach it differently.
That's really interesting because, again, going back to what we've been talking about, there's so much pressure. And so you feel like you just want to start today or start yesterday, slap something on and try to, as quickly as you can, get to that productivity gain, right? Something in the short term to really help your business. But what you're actually saying is take a step back, think about your proficiency, learn the AI tools, really start to understand how it can help your business before trying to put something on top. And so I think that's really interesting. That's not what we're hearing a lot from the world. And so I think, we're looking at this, like, how can you really perform well over the short, medium, and long term? I love this idea of proficiency that you're talking about. But what are some of what are some companies out there saying about, why they need to focus on, efficiency, or why you think that could be misleading?
I mean, we all, want to be efficient, right? Like, I think it's in pursuit of growth. But I think there's a little danger of like growth at all costs or growth as the only objective is misleading. Like growth is a lagging indicator, right? A lot of things you have to do to go into getting growth for your business. But we focus on like kind of the end metrics and the things we can quantify. Efficiency is like, again, one of those easy things like, oh, it took us X amount of time before, it takes us X minus some amount of time now. Why it's misleading though is that even if, let's say, you get efficiency early on, so let's pick a number. Let's say you adopt AI and you get, I don't know, we'll pick a very small number, 2% efficiency gains because you adopted generative AI in your processes, and it's just a very surface level type of thing. First of all, that means very different things to different people, right? 2% in some of the multi-billion-dollar organizations is like tens of millions of dollars of savings or more, and you can do a lot with that. For a solo operator, that might just be a couple of hours per month. But either way, if you're just looking at it as like, okay, I got this 2% back, now I can either do 2% less work or I can do 2% more of the same thing. When I say it in those numbers, it just sounds like nonsense. Like, well, that's negligible. Why would I even make the effort? And that's where seeing it differently, I think, is very important because you have to change what you use it for. So imagine if instead of focusing on 2% efficiency, we use that time to improve your offering, or we use those savings to like deepen a customer relationship and do something a little bit more for them, or we use that time to start building like an entirely new capability. That's where you start stacking real value, right? Like if you save 2% of time, great. But if you could make your customer experience 2% better, if you could make your product 2% better, that could be the thing that boosts retention. And that could shift perception and win back a client or retain a client. And that could actually move market share to you and get outsized returns beyond just the 2%. So those incremental improvements in quality, not just speed, is where the real leverage is. But if we're too obsessed with the efficiency in the short term and too obsessed on like immediate growth, then we're going to miss out on that opportunity. So that's the shift I try to help teams make, is that AI isn't just about the efficiency, it's about reinvesting those resources strategically to make your business better in ways that you previously couldn't.
I think this is so important. And Sean, this is why I'm so happy you're on here talking about this, because, I think one thing that I see constantly, and we've kind of mentioned it before, talked about it, it's like on LinkedIn, we see all these examples of the AI SDR. This is how you can send thousands of emails. They're all personalized, right? And so there's a huge productivity gain that you can now send thousands, hundreds of thousands of communications to try to reach a massive audience. So it's basically like we now have the ability to do, send a lot of emails, or when we could send a lot of emails, now we can send a whole ton of emails, right? We're thinking that's going to be great. But, from my experience, when I've been in other businesses, we had sequences, we had automation workflows, and we could send out thousands, tens of thousands of these sequences. But if our our response rate was super low, we shouldn't just be doing more of that, right? So with AI, again, going back to this example with the AI SDR, if you're not sending out something that's useful, if you're not improving your fundamental product and you're understanding better your customer, sending out 1,000 more emails that are slightly personalized to that person isn't really going to help you. You really need to think about the fundamental shift. If you're going to be able to make a lot of these productivity gains and reach a lot more people, well, how do you actually go and provide a message and the positioning that's really important to reach them and talk to them in a way that's going to actually convert? So I think it's a really important shift to not just think about this as terms of oh, I can send a lot more emails, but it's how do those emails actually become really useful? How do I understand my product, my customer better? And I think, when we talk about when you're working with some of the teams that you're working with, if we want to bring it back to some kind of examples, how do you know when the business is moving from dabbling, oh, I'm just trying out a couple things, I'm going to figure out how I'm using AI, to this proficiency that you're talking about? What are the signs that you look for?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first is it is the dabbling, right? Because you have a lot of companies who are like, I don't know, I'm afraid. And then all the shadow AI usage we've talked about, they're just completely unaware. So awareness is a great first step to not just be dabbling, right? And then building the knowledge is the next piece to it. But what I look for as we're really seeing the progression, right, is do they have a policy and a strategy in place? That's a big marker. Mm-hmm. Then the next piece is, are they changing their workflows, right? So it's we were doing it in this way before, and they can articulate that change. That's how we thought about it. We were doing it this way. Now we're doing it this way for these reasons, and here's why. But my favorite and the ultimate metric is, and it's something I've learned with innovation over time. It's when someone tells you what you've told them as if it was their idea. So we'll have one of the things we do to help with AI adoption is let's do communities of practice. So people come in, they'll talk about, here's how I'm using it, here's what worked, here's what didn't, here's some cool prompts, and here's maybe something I'm struggling with. And so they'll come in, and the sophistication where they're so I used it to do this, this, and this, and I tried doing this, and this is where I got stuck. But they don't talk about where can I use AI? They talk about where they have used it and where the edges are so that they can build on it as if it's their idea and they just now know it's a part of their workflow. It's a part of how they think. It's a part of how they operate. So that's what I look for where I'm okay, now this organization has integrated not just AI, but this culture of thinking and innovation and adoption. So now they're ready, whatever direction the technology moves in, to adopt that and bring it in because you've really changed those patterns of behavior.
All right. Thank you so much, Sean. I want to take a pause here and pull together a lot of what Sean just shared, because I think there are some really actionable takeaways, right? First, we're not late to this party. So AI adoption is happening fast, but we're still in the early stages. I think of where you can learn, you can experiment, you can build proficiency while your competitors are still figuring out if they should even try ChatGPT. But I think the next kind of important point, what I'm really hearing from you, Sean, is the real opportunity isn't just doing your current work faster or getting on the AI hype train. It's using the time and capacity that AI gives you to do work that you couldn't do before, to potentially do fundamental shifts and really transform what you're doing. Whether that's improving your customer experience, developing new capabilities, or it sounds like also just taking the time to develop and think more strategically about your business.
Yeah, absolutely, Kyle. You nailed it. And I think, the opportunity is now.
Right. So we've got a lot going on in AI news this week, although at this point, I feel like we say this every week because it's generally true. So Kyle, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, our first story, I think is really important and kind of building off of some of the last news stories that we were talking about. The European Union just dropped the final enforcement guidelines for the AI Act. And I think last week we had given expectation it would happen in 2026. Well, actually, this is happening in 3 weeks.
So everyone thought that there might be a delay on this, but last week on the 4th of July, ironically enough, the European Commission confirmed that this is happening on August 2nd. And if you're thinking, oh, but I'm not in Europe, so this doesn't affect me, You got to think again. This is about to really ripple through every corner of the business world.
Yeah, and just to show how big this is, over 100 major tech companies, including, Google's parent company Alphabet, Meta, which runs Facebook, and others, spent the last few weeks literally begging the EU to delay this. They sent letters, they lobbied politicians, the whole 9 yards. And ultimately, this is just like what happened with GDPR, where it came down very, very quickly.
Oh, yeah, it really did. And in this instance, I believe as with GDPR as well, the EU basically said, no, we're not delaying it. The European Commission spokesperson put it perfectly. He actually said, there is no stop the clock. There is no grace period. There is no pause. So it is going ahead, no matter how much pressure the big companies are putting on them. Too late.
And the reason that it's going to impact all of us, even though it's an EU thing, is because these large companies, they work and they do their business across all these boundaries. So they have to start implementing these systems and these processes in place, which is then going to percolate down to smaller businesses. So we all have to kind of keep track of it. But to break this down into more business terms, the EU AI Act is basically the world's first comprehensive AI law. So it's big. And think of it like GDPR, but just for artificial intelligence. And just like for GDPR, even if you're not in Europe, if you have European customers or you use AI tools that serve European markets, which, like what I was just saying, all of these big companies that we work with, they do serve European markets. So you're going to end up feeling this.
So starting on the 2nd of August, companies that make or use what the EU calls general purpose AI, so that's basically ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, all of the tools that we talk about all the time, they've got to start following some pretty specific rules.
Yeah, when Jess says specific, she means specific. So each one of these tools will have to publish detailed summaries of their training data, prove they're not violating copyright laws. That's going to be a tricky one. That should be really interesting. And then they're going to have to document everything from model evaluations to risk assessments.
And then what's really interesting is the EU has created these risk categories. And so some AI uses are banned outright. So things like social scoring or AI that manipulates people's behavior, quite rightly so. And then there are higher risk applications like facial recognition or AI that's used in hiring or education, which obviously could have a lot of biases.
Yeah, and tools like ChatGPT or Claude fall into the more limited risk category, mainly around transparency requirements. But as we've talked about, the copyright piece is huge. The guidelines specifically say AI models can't reproduce training data in their outputs. So for instance, if an AI image generator splits out something that looks exactly like a copyrighted image from its training set, that's a problem. Now we know from the Midjourney case that we talked a lot about, a few weeks ago, this is something that's being, settled in court right now. So the EU AI Act kind of settles that issue for us.
So here's why this matters for your business. So first of all, the tools that you use every day are about to get more transparent, which, as we talked about in our ethics episode, this is not a bad thing, despite what the big tech companies will tell you about, suppressing innovation. That's not necessarily true. Companies like OpenAI and Google will have to tell us more about how their models work and what data they trained on, which is a really, really big thing.
And also another thing that I think is really important is if you're using AI to create content on, you need to start thinking more carefully about copyright. So the days of AI generated and it's fine are now at an end.
And third, and I cannot stress this enough as someone who is not based in the US, this is not just a European problem. If you use any of these AI tools and have customers anywhere in the EU, or if any of the AI companies you rely on serve European markets, these rules are going to trickle down to you. They will affect you. If you've ever had to deal with GDPR, you know how this works. This is going to be exactly the same. It's going to be better to be EU AI Act compliant, and wow, that's a mouthful to say. It's going to be better to be compliant kind of in advance than it's going to be to retroactively go in and kind of clean things up, because that's what's messy and potentially expensive. Sean, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's easy to frame regulation as a burden, but I believe that constraints unlock creativity. And when you give people total freedom, it often backfires, right? They get overwhelmed, or they default to the familiar, or they take the easiest, lowest path. But when you give them a clear set of boundaries, that's where the best work tends to emerge. It's like sports, and I'll take it back to tennis, right? Like By playing tennis, you don't prove your skill by taking the net down or widening the court. You demonstrate it by learning how to win within the lines, within the constraints and the rules of the game that are fair for everyone. The challenge of doing that is what makes it meaningful, and it's what makes the outcome credible. So when big, well-resourced companies, push back hard on regulation, I don't always think the issue is the rule. Sometimes it's just that the game got harder to win, and I think that's okay. And in fact, that's kind of the point. The policies aren't about slowing things down; they're about raising the standard. And the companies that learn how to compete at that level are the ones that people will actually trust to build what's next.
Yeah, and the good news is, this is rolling out in phases through 2026, so you have time to adapt. But Sean, exactly to your point, the process starts now, and the quicker you become familiar with this, the more you can unlock a lot of creativity in that opportunity.
There's actually some good news on the environmental front this week that ties back to our ethics episode last week. So Kyle, do you want to tell them about this really cool new battery recycling story?
Yeah, this is pretty brilliant. I love this. So, last week we talked about AI's massive energy footprint and all of those data centers becoming the new coal plants of the century. And some of them are, clean and offset their carbon footprint, and others don't, right?
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that AI is driving this massive spike in energy demand, and a lot of it's being powered by fossil fuels, which obviously is not ideal and a major concern for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a company called Redwood Materials, and they just launched something called Redwood Energy. They're taking old electric vehicle batteries that still have anywhere between 50 or 80% of their life left, and turning them into renewable energy storage systems.
And their first customer is an AI data center company called Crusoe. So they're literally using old EV batteries to power AI with solar energy. So it's like the circle of sustainable tech life, which is so lovely.
Yeah, and also those batteries aren't going into landfill.
Sustainable.
But the numbers are wild too. So they already have enough old batteries stockpiled to build 1 gigawatt hour of storage, which is enough power to power over 1 million homes for about an hour. By 2028, they're planning to deploy 20 gigawatt hours of storage.
This is exactly the type of solution that we need to see more of. So instead of just building more gas plants to feed AI's insatiable hunger for energy, we're repurposing waste into clean energy. The batteries aren't going back into a landfill, and it's really innovative, it's really sustainable, and it shows that the AI boom doesn't have to be an environmental disaster.
Mm-hmm. And why do we focus on this story for our listeners? It might seem a little bit, edge case, but I think it's a good reason to stay informed about why these developments mattered. As you start, as we talked about, voting with your dollars, you can start asking your cloud providers and your AI service providers about their energy sourcing. If it's something that's really important to you, you can start factoring sustainability into your vendor.
Your customers are going to start asking these questions as well, and being able to say that you use AI tools that are powered by renewable energy is going to become a competitive advantage. The environmental impact of AI is a really, really, really big issue for a lot of people. So it'll be good to be able to answer that question reasonably.
Now, speaking of competitive advantages gone wrong, this week our AI gone wrong segment and our AI news segment are kind of colliding because Grok has had a very, very, very bad week.
So Grok, for those of you who don't remember, is Elon Musk's AI chatbot that lives on the platform formerly known as Twitter, and it's been having a very public, very bad meltdown over there on the platform that shall not be named.
We've covered it in our episode about LLMs. It's usually not on the top of our list of recommended tools. Jess, neither of you or I use it very much. Sean, I don't know if you've tried it or used it at all. Yeah, it doesn't usually show up. But I would say after this week, we definitely do not recommend it.
No. So what happened was, over the last few weeks, Grok has been posting anti-Semitic content, racist remarks, and completely false information. It's kind of had a history of doing that, but it got really, really bad this week. And it's not just responding to users, but it's actually generating and sharing this content proactively.
The worst part of it though is, it's been doing this while citing X posts as sources. So it's essentially amplifying the worst content on the platform and giving it an AI stamp of authority.
Grok was designed on purpose because, of course, because look who its founder is. It was to be more unfiltered than other AI models. So that means less safety restrictions, more willingness to engage with controversial topics. But without proper guardrails, it's getting even worse, and it's being trained on data that's even worse as well. And it's really starting to generate harmful content and conspiracy theories. And it was actually instructed to not shy away from making claims which are politically incorrect, as long as they are well substantiated, which means using Twitter content, in which case it would not be really substantiated. So
yeah, and kind of removing some of the political or inflammatory aspects of this story, which you could spend a long time talking about, and I'm sure a lot of people have talked about. What I think we want to focus on is really about how, you want to be using tools for your business that are safe, secure, you understand the outputs, and that you're getting consistent responses. And so again, like Jess was talking about, those proper guardrails, it's great for the stories and it's great for content. And obviously there's a lot, being covered around it. But as you start thinking about how to use some of these tools for your business, you want to make sure that the tools that you're using are safe and secure. So that's something to really be, cognizant of. Where this becomes a business lesson though, and not just part of the hype cycle, X's CEO, Linda Yaccarino, she stepped down last week. She hasn't really given a full reason why, but the timing is definitely very suspicious or suspect in terms of this whole Grok, kind of inflammatory issue. And I think we can at least safely say it played a major role. So when your AI becomes a liability to your executive team, something's gone very wrong.
Yeah, and for our audience, this is a great example of why you need to look at the AI tools that you're using. We've talked a lot about this, and I'm not saying that people want to read the T's and C's, but you do kind of need to be aware. We've never really recommended Grok as a LLM that we would recommend for business, but now we absolutely could not, in good conscience, recommend it for business use. It is probably the worst one that you could use at this point.
Yeah, and unfortunately, they just released the newest version of Grok, which is getting pretty good reviews from a technical perspective. Obviously, apart from the $300 price tag, $300 per month, which is pretty pricey. But I think the issue now is that the platform as a whole is just a bit of a business risk, so you may want to kind of avoid it. Again, going back to the practical takeaway, when you're evaluating AI tools for your business, look at their content policies and safety measures. You want something that's going to not damage your brand and get you in legal trouble.
There's always been, or there has been for a while, some major concerns about brand safety issues on Twitter/X, and this has just made it about 20 million times worse, shall we say. So, I just avoid. Sean, any thoughts on this one?
If the EU AI Act is about setting the rules of the road, Grok is what happens when you take the guardrails off and just hit the gas, right?
Into a wall, into a brick wall.
What I think is interesting is, maybe internally more in the company than externally, but people will be arguing if this is like a technical failure, like the model didn't work well, right? But I see this as a governance failure. Like when you remove the human oversight and you let the AI speak publicly on your behalf, you're not just risking bad outputs, but you're signaling that like the judgment and the quality just aren't priorities for your organization and what you're putting out there. And that can be really dangerous, right? Like I would not give my toddler scissors and let her loose to do whatever she wants with those scissors. And AI is still in its infancy and it's growing. And I think those who develop it and as businesses use it and adopt it, like our judgment, right, and our thoughtfulness and how we go about it and the guardrails and constraints we put on it is really important. And that's why I think it's a big reminder that speed without strategy is not innovation, it's just risk.
Yeah, I love that. We're going to put that on a t-shirt too, right alongside your rogue intern there,
Sean. Going to get a pack of t-shirts from us.
Yeah, no, speed without strategy isn't innovation, it's risk. I think that's great. And I think, if I'll add to that, my bottom line is, AI tools are only as good as their training data and their safety measures. So you need to choose tools from companies that take responsibility for their AI output, not ones that treat controversy as a feature and are kind of playing into that news cycle. So Sean, before we wrap up today's episode, we've just finished part one of definitely part two, but to kind of talk about part one, what's one thing our listeners can do this week before we get to your part two next week to start building that proficiency you talked about?
I think this one's a really easy one. Use AI for something, whatever it is you do regularly, writing emails, creating social posts, analyzing data. And this week, just focus on getting the AI to help you do it better. Right? Don't focus on speed, give it a little bit of time, but just say, what can I do to improve this output? And then prompt and have that conversation with your preferred Gen AI tool to just improve it. You don't need to revolutionize the whole business to start with, but just get good at that one specific thing. And if it's something you know very well, you'll also know how to improve it and how you want to, see the output as like successful or not. And so that's on the individual level. And I would say for business leaders, if you have a team, have a real conversation with them about what tools they're using. And what I would say is norm the behavior, right? Say, I used, you say ChatGPT to do X yesterday. I thought it was really helpful, but here's where I ran into issues. And this is what I did. And normalize that you are doing it, because if people see their leaders doing it, then they feel more comfortable having that conversation in an open way. But if you're just, kind of going about it in an interrogative way and asking them, what are you doing? What are you not doing? That can land in different places. But I guarantee you they're experimenting with something, and there's probably a lot of value in it that you could scale to your organization, but only if you make it safe for them to share that and bring it to the table. And the best way to do that is to norm that use yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That is so perfect. Start small, go deep, and then you can expand it into other areas. And honestly, just acknowledging that your team is already using AI probably removes so much of the weird secrecy around it. Like, it's better that it's out in the open and that people are talking about it and sharing stories and sharing inspiration and ideas, because that's, one thing that we often hear is that people don't even know what to use it for. So just getting people talking amongst themselves, they're absolutely going to come up with new and really cool ways to use it.
Yeah, this has been fascinating, Sean. I've definitely taken some of the quotes that you said. We're definitely having you back for part two, which I'm super excited about. And for our listeners, we're going to dive into the pitfalls that you see companies making. So how can they best, use AI and not fall into some of these pitfalls with some use cases. And then I think we're going to actually go into how to build these AI policies that work. So how can you now use this for your business? And I think that's really going to drive it home for everyone. And Sean, why don't you remind people how they can reach you, whether it's this week, next week, or when you're coming back. We want to make sure that they can reach out to you to dig deeper into their own businesses and the struggles they're going through.
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. Our website is breakthroughgrow.com, or just shoot me an email. I'm at Sean@breakthroughgrow.com. And for early adopter listeners, I'd be happy to do a quick 15-minute AI strategy chat if you mention the podcast. Sometimes you just need someone to help you figure out where to start or just have that conversation. I truly love doing this, and I believe it's a transformative technology that everyone can and should have access to and engage with. So yeah, I'm happy to be here today. Looking forward to coming back and just continue the conversation and all of us sharing what we have learned so we can all make the improvements that we need to in our organizations and our communities.
Thanks to everyone for listening to Early Adopter, where we help make AI your unfair advantage. And this week, the biggest thing is just give it a try. Just pick one thing to get good at. And until next time, keep innovating and stay curious.
Thanks, Sean. We'll see you for part two. And there we'll talk about AI initiatives and how to make sure your AI initiative doesn't fail and you get the most out of it. So thank you, everyone. See you next week.